Have you ever been so underestimated by your own family that they literally threw you out on the street? What if I told you that 8 years later, you discovered you'd been secretly protecting the very people who destroyed you, earning millions, while they called you a failure? This is the true story of how I went from pathetic pretend hacker Barbie to the invisible guardian of America's most critical infrastructure. And the night I walked into my sister's engagement party and watched their entire world collapse when they realized who I really was. Stay with me, because this story will change how you think about revenge, success, and the power of proving everyone wrong. **** Alexandra Sterling. We're ready for your signature. The contract lay before me like a golden ticket to vindication. It's classified details representing everything I'd fought for during 8 grueling years. 8 years since they'd thrown me out of our Beverly Hills mansion like yesterday's garbage, my belongings shoved into black trash bags while neighbors watched from their perfectly manicured lawns. 8 years since my sister Victoria had sneered through her perfect white teeth, calling me pathetic pretend hacker Barbie as I loaded my beat-up Honda with everything I owned. Now, sitting in my corner office on the 47th floor overlooking downtown Los Angeles, I held a government contract worth more than Sterling Defense Solutions would ever see in their wildest dreams. My phone buzzed with that familiar ringtone I'd assigned to family calls. A funeral march seemed appropriate. Mom's contact photo appeared on my iPhone 14 Pro Max, showing that same condescending smile she'd worn when telling our country club friends that I played with computers for a living. The irony wasn't lost on me that the very technology she'd dismissed was now protecting the infrastructure that kept her lights on and her water running. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, letting her wonder if I was too busy with my computer games to answer her call. But curiosity got the better of me, especially considering what I knew about Sterling Defense's recent financial struggles. This conversation was going to be absolutely delicious. "Hi, Mom," I answered, keeping my voice neutral while I signed my name with a flourish across the classified contract. The pen felt heavy with authority and the satisfaction of secrets my family would never understand, thanks to my top-secret security clearance. "Hi, sweetheart," came that sugary tone she reserved for when she needed something, the same voice she'd used when asking me to fix their computer problems before banishing me from their lives. The hypocrisy was so thick I could practically taste it through the phone. "I'm calling about Victoria's engagement party next weekend at the Four Seasons Beverly Hills. Very upscale, very exclusive." Of course it was. Everything with my family had to project success and sophistication, especially when that success was built on increasingly shaky foundations. I leaned back in my custom leather chair, worth more than most people's monthly salary, and watched the Los Angeles skyline stretch out beneath me like a circuit board of possibilities. 45 floors below, ordinary people were going about their Tuesday afternoon lives, completely unaware that the digital infrastructure protecting their banks, their hospitals, their transportation systems, and their power grid was secured by programs my team had designed and implemented. While my family thought I was playing video games in some dingy apartment, I was literally the invisible guardian keeping modern civilization running smoothly. The classified nature of my work meant they could never know the true scope of what I'd accomplished, but that was about to change in the most spectacular way possible. "We've invited some very important clients," Mom continued, her voice carrying that practiced enthusiasm she used for social climbing. "Sterling Defense's biggest accounts, really. It's more of a business networking function than a family celebration, you understand." Of course it was. Everything with my family was about business, about maintaining appearances, about preserving the illusion that the Sterling name still carried weight in the private security world. They'd turned my sister's engagement into another opportunity to schmooze clients and desperately shore up their failing company's reputation. The desperation in Mom's voice was almost palpable, though she was trying to hide it behind her usual country club confidence. "Victoria's marrying Blake Harrison," Mom gushed, launching into what was obviously a well-rehearsed sales pitch. He's the regional sales director at Apex Security Systems. You know, the company that supplies all our security equipment and monitoring services. It's such a perfect match, really, combining business synergy with true romance. Perfect indeed. My sister was marrying into their business ecosystem, cementing her position as the golden child while ensuring Sterling Defense's continued access to essential suppliers. It was a strategic alliance disguised as love, which was exactly the kind of calculated move I'd expect from Victoria. She'd always been better at playing the family politics game than I ever was or wanted to be. The irony was exquisite. While they were celebrating Victoria's engagement to a security equipment salesman, I was signing contracts to protect the nation's most critical digital infrastructure from state-sponsored attacks. While they were planning a party to impress small-time clients with champagne and networking, I was commanding a team of elite cyber warriors defending America's power grid from foreign adversaries. But they would never see it that way, would they? To them, I would always be the family disappointment who chose computers over real relationships and stable career paths. That perception was about to be shattered in the most public and humiliating way possible. "Don't you dare touch that computer without my permission?" Dad's voice had thundered through our Beverly Hills estate like a sonic boom, his face purple with rage as he yanked me away from his mahogany desk setup. I'd only been trying to help, attempting to remove the malware that was making his expensive custom-built system run like molasses. At 12 years old, I'd already taught myself basic troubleshooting from library books, spending countless hours after private school learning about networks and systems while other kids played tennis or took violin lessons. But Dad hadn't wanted the computer fixed. He'd wanted his digital secrets buried deeper than the San Andreas fault. The horrible realization hit me like ice water in my veins. The computer wasn't just running slowly because of viruses. The sluggish performance was caused by Dad covering his tracks, frantically deleting browser histories and clearing caches every time he visited gambling websites and adult entertainment sites that would have scandalized our social circle. Here was our family's patriarch, the man who preached about integrity and family values at every country club dinner, living a double life that explained why our household staff kept getting laid off and why Mom's shopping trips to Rodeo Drive had become less frequent. I was only 12, but I understood enough about computers to recognize the digital breadcrumbs of deception, and I understood enough about family dynamics to know that pointing this out would only make me the villain of this story. "Why can't you be normal like your sister?" Dad continued, his embarrassment manifesting as fury directed at the child who'd accidentally uncovered his shame. "Victoria spends her time on appropriate activities, social skills, etiquette lessons, learning how to be a proper young lady who'll make this family proud someday." There it was, the comparison that would define my entire childhood and adolescence. Victoria, who practiced her charm on country club members and memorized the names of Dad's business contacts like other kids memorized multiplication tables. Victoria, who instinctively understood that her worth was measured by her ability to be decorative, compliant, and useful to the family's social ambitions. Victoria, who would never ask uncomfortable questions or accidentally stumble upon inconvenient truths hidden in browser histories. "There might be something fundamentally wrong with you, Alexandra," Dad had continued, each word designed to cut deeper than the last. "Normal girls don't obsess over machines and technology. Normal girls care about relationships and social connections and building the kind of life that makes their families proud. Something wrong with me for being curious about how the digital world functioned, for wanting to understand the technology that was obviously going to shape our future, for having the audacity to be different from the daughter mold they'd created specifically for Victoria. The cruelty was breathtaking in its precision, targeting a 12-year-old's deepest insecurities about belonging and acceptance. Mom had stood in our Italian marble doorway, arms crossed in judgment, nodding. Along with his character assassination like a supportive audience member at a particularly vicious theater performance. "Alexandra needs to focus on developing proper feminine interests," she'd declared with the authority of someone who'd never questioned the limitations placed on her own dreams. Things like interior design, social planning, charitable work, skills that will help her become the kind of wife and mother who elevates her husband's career instead of competing with it. The message was crystal clear. My value as a human being was directly proportional to how well I could suppress my own interests and talents in service of someone else's ambitions. That night, lying in my canopy bed surrounded by all the material, privileges that were supposed to make me grateful and compliant, I'd started planning something that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with survival. I was too young to understand the concept of psychological warfare, but I instinctively knew that I needed to become financially independent from people who would sacrifice my potential to protect their own secrets. I'd started my first secret, savings account the next week, hiding birthday money and allowance cash in a shoebox under my bed like a 12-year-old prepper preparing for the apocalypse of family expectations. $9,745. My first step toward a freedom I couldn't even properly conceptualize yet, but knew I desperately needed. The Silicon Valley Tech Academy met every Thursday evening at the local community college, a beacon of possibility I discovered purely by accident while walking home from Westbridge Preparatory School. Through the computer lab windows, I'd seen adults hunched over terminals, typing code that looked like digital poetry, creating programs that could solve real problems and build actual solutions. Professor Chen, a retired Apple engineer with more patience than any teenager deserved, had become my unofficial mentor and the first adult who didn't think my fascination with technology was a character defect or a phase to be outgrown. For 3 precious months, I'd been the youngest member of a diverse group that included software engineers, IT professionals, data scientists, and passionate hobbyists who believed the future was being written in programming languages. For 3 months, I'd experienced what it felt like to belong somewhere, to have my questions taken seriously and my ideas treated as potentially valuable contributions rather than amusing novelties. Professor Chen taught me Python, Java, and the foundational principles of cybersecurity, while other group members shared real-world experiences about building networks, preventing data breaches, and protecting digital infrastructure. These Thursday evenings had become the highlight of my entire week, the only time I felt intellectually challenged and emotionally supported by adults who understood that curiosity was a gift rather than a burden. I'd started dreaming about studying computer science at Stanford or MIT, imagining a future where my technical skills could make a meaningful difference in the world. Mom, Dad, Alexandra is playing pretend hacker Barbie with those weird computer nerds again, Victoria had announced at dinner one Thursday evening, her voice dripping with theatrical concern that barely concealed her malicious satisfaction. She'd followed me to the community college, spying on my activities like a private investigator hired to gather evidence of wrongdoing. The betrayal cut deeper than any insult she'd ever hurled at me because it represented a calculated effort to destroy the one thing that brought me genuine happiness and intellectual fulfillment. She hadn't stumbled upon my secret accidentally. She'd deliberately hunted down my safe space and weaponized it against me. Alexandra. Dad's voice had been dangerously quiet, carrying that barely controlled fury that always preceded his most devastating psychological attacks. You're spending unsupervised time with adult men you barely know, learning God knows what kind of inappropriate material? The insinuation was disgusting and deliberately designed to make my innocent pursuit of knowledge sound predatory and dangerous. These so-called teachers are filling your head with unrealistic nonsense about career paths that don't exist for normal people, especially not for young women who should be focusing on developing social skills and emotional intelligence. He'd managed to simultaneously question my judgment, my safety, my intellectual capacity, and my gender's ability to succeed in technical fields. Those computer geeks are poisoning your mind against your own family, Dad had continued, building toward his crescendo of manipulation. They're convincing you that this fantasy world of codes and programs is more important than real relationships and genuine human connections. They're turning you into someone we don't recognize, someone who thinks she's too good for the life and opportunities we've provided. The accusation was so perfectly reversed that it took my breath away. He was describing his own behavior, his own systematic effort to isolate me from anything that might give me confidence or independence. He was projecting his fears about losing control onto the very people who were helping me discover my authentic self. If that's your idea of a future, Alexandra, Victoria had laughed with genuine amusement, then you'll end up alone with your computers forever. No husband, no children, no real life, just you and your little fantasy games pretending to be important. The cruelty was surgical in its precision, targeting every teenage insecurity about love, belonging, and social acceptance. She knew exactly which emotional buttons to press to make me question whether intellectual fulfillment was worth social isolation, whether following my passion was worth risking permanent loneliness. The next day, Dad had called Professor Chen personally, informing him that his daughter was no longer allowed to participate in the program, humiliating me in front of the first adult mentor who'd ever taken my dreams seriously. But instead of breaking me, their intervention had crystallized something fundamental about my relationship with my family and my future. If they wanted to cut off my formal education in technology, I'd teach myself through online resources and library books. If they thought programming was pretend, I'd build real programs that solved actual problems for paying clients. That night, I'd started my first serious project. Not just a simple program to track their cruelties, but a comprehensive system for documenting every slight, every dismissal, every moment they'd tried to make me feel worthless or ashamed of my interests. I called it my motivation database, and by the time I graduated from high school, it contained over 60 pages of meticulously cataloged emotional abuse that would fuel my determination for the next decade. Computer science is for mathematical geniuses and socially awkward outcasts who can't function in the real world, sweetheart. You're neither a genius nor a complete social disaster, so let's be realistic about your actual capabilities. Mom's words had landed like a physical slap across the face of my carefully planned future. We'd been sitting in my high school guidance counselor's office, discussing college applications and potential career paths, when I'd finally summoned the courage to voice my real academic interests. The guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, had been enthusiastically supportive, showing us statistics about job growth in cybersecurity and technology fields. But Mom had dismissed the entire conversation with the casual cruelty that had become her trademark parenting style. Criminal justice, Dad had announced with the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. You'll study criminal justice, or you'll figure out how to pay your own tuition, room, and board. End of discussion. His tone brooked no argument, no negotiation, no consideration of my preferences or aptitudes. But I want to study computer science, I'd whispered, my voice barely audible in the suddenly tense conference room. I'm already good at it, and I've been accepted to several excellent programs with partial scholarships. The acceptance letters were hidden in my bedroom, along with scholarship offers that could have made my dreams financially feasible, but mentioning them would have been like waving red flags in front of already agitated bulls. Being good at playing video games and surfing the internet isn't the same as having the intellectual capacity for serious computer science study, Mom had replied with devastating casualness. Honey, you need to be realistic about your limitations and choose a career path that matches your actual abilities rather than your fantasies. Her assessment was so completely wrong that it would have been comical if it hadn't been so professionally destructive. I'd been teaching myself advanced programming languages since 8th grade, building functioning websites for local businesses, and scoring in the 98th percentile on every technical aptitude test I'd ever taken. But according to my mother, these achievements were equivalent to recreational game playing. Criminal justice is practical and respectable, Dad had continued, warming to his theme of crushing my dreams under the weight of his expectations. It's directly related to security work, which means you could potentially contribute to Sterling Defense Solutions someday if you prove yourself capable and dedicated. The family business dangled like a carrot I was supposed to desperately want to reach. You could handle administrative tasks, client communications, basic research support roles that would free up Victoria and me to focus on the complex strategic work that requires real business acumen. Support roles, administrative tasks. The message was unmistakably clear. Even in the best-case scenario, I would never be considered leadership material. The compromise I'd eventually negotiated was studying criminal justice at UCLA while secretly pursuing a computer science minor that I'd pay for with money earned from my part-time job at a local computer repair shop. My parents thought I was learning to become a police officer or FBI agent, respectable law enforcement careers they could brag about at country club functions. What I was actually doing was building the technical foundation for what would eventually become CyberShield Dynamics, mastering programming languages, network security protocols, and digital forensics techniques that would prove far more valuable than any traditional criminal justice degree. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was studying how to catch criminals while planning the perfect crime against my family's expectations and assumptions about my potential. During those 4 years at UCLA, I'd maintained perfect grades in both my official major and my secret technical courses while working 25 hours per week at TechFix Solutions, a computer repair shop where I'd learned more about practical cybersecurity in 6 months than most people absorbed an entire degree programs. Every evening and weekend, I was troubleshooting network vulnerabilities, removing malware from small business systems, and building custom security solutions for clients who couldn't afford the expensive consultation fees charged by major firms. By my junior year, I was earning more money from freelance cybersecurity work than most of my classmates would make in their first full-time jobs after graduation. The beautiful part was that my parents remained completely oblivious to my double life throughout college. They thought I was studying police procedures and constitutional law while preparing for a stable career in law enforcement. They had no idea I was simultaneously mastering ethical hacking techniques, advanced cryptography, network penetration, testing, and the kind of cutting-edge cybersecurity skills that would soon make me more valuable to federal agencies than any traditional criminal justice graduate. Every semester, when they asked about my studies, I'd tell them about criminal psychology courses and legal procedure classes while keeping my real education completely secret. It was the perfect preparation for a life of protecting national infrastructure while maintaining the cover story that would eventually make my revenge so much more devastating and complete. You're no daughter of mine if you're going to waste your life on this pathetic computer fantasy instead of accepting a real position with real responsibilities in the real world. Dad's words had hung in the Beverly Hills air like toxic smog, poisoning the last remnants of any relationship we might have salvaged. We'd been having the conversation I'd been dreading since graduation, my post-college career plans and the future of my relationship with Sterling Defense Solutions. They'd offered me a position as an administrative coordinator, essentially a glorified secretary who would answer phones, file paperwork, and fetch coffee for the actual security professionals. $36,400 per year. To be their office mascot, their token college graduate daughter, who could be displayed at client meetings as evidence of the family's commitment to education and professional development. The truly pathetic part was that I'd actually considered accepting their offer for approximately 10 minutes. Not because I wanted the job, the thought of filing reports and scheduling meetings made my skin crawl, but because some desperate, damaged part of me still craved their approval and acceptance. Maybe working alongside them would finally prove that I could contribute meaningfully to the family legacy. Maybe they'd eventually recognize my technical skills and allow me to modernize their outdated security protocols. Maybe we could find common ground in protecting people and businesses from genuine threats, even if we approached that mission from different angles. Then reality had reasserted itself like a bucket of ice water to the face. I'd remembered the secret freelance consulting work I'd been doing throughout college, the 15 small businesses I'd already helped protect from cyber attacks, the $39,000 I'd earned over 2 years from cybersecurity projects that required expertise Sterling Defense couldn't even begin to understand. I'd remembered the job offer from Guardian Tech Corp, a mid-tier cybersecurity firm in downtown Los Angeles, offering me a junior analyst position with a starting salary of $84,500, more than twice what my family was offering for their administrative coordinator role. "I want to start my own cybersecurity consulting company," I'd said quietly, the words feeling simultaneously terrifying and liberating as they left my mouth. "I already have clients and a business plan. I've been doing freelance work throughout college, and I know there's a market for specialized security services." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in their formal living room, counting down the seconds until my family imploded with shock, rage, and disbelief. Dad's face had cycled through several color changes before settling on an alarming shade of purple that made me briefly concerned about his cardiovascular health. "Clients?" Mom had practically shrieked, her country club composure cracking like thin ice. "What clients? Who would possibly hire you for anything more complicated than basic tech support?" She'd asked the question like it was rhetorical, like the very concept of someone taking my professional skills seriously was inherently absurd. I could have told them about Mrs. Chen's accounting firm, where I'd prevented a ransomware attack that would have exposed hundreds of client tax returns and destroyed her business. I could have mentioned Dr. Rodriguez's medical practice, where I'd recovered 15 years of patient records from a sophisticated data breach and implemented security protocols that exceeded HIPAA requirements. I could have shown them testimonials from business owners who credited me with saving their livelihoods and protecting their customers' sensitive information. Instead, I'd chosen silence, partly because I knew they wouldn't believe the evidence. Anyway, and partly because I was already planning something much more dramatic than a simple recitation of my professional accomplishments. "Listen to me very carefully, Alexandra," Dad had said, his voice dropping to that dangerously quiet register he used when his authority was being challenged. "You can accept the administrative position at Sterling Defense, or you can figure out how to support yourself in the real world. But you will not embarrass this family by pretending to run some fantasy technology business that exists only in your imagination. Fantasy technology business. The same business that was already generating more monthly income than their administrative position would provide annually." "Fine, pathetic pretend hacker Barbie," Victoria had interjected with vicious satisfaction, using the evolved version of her childhood nickname that had grown crueler with each passing year. "Go live in your make-believe world and see how long it takes before reality destroys your delusions." The nickname had started as Pretend Hacker Barbie when I was 14, evolved to Little Pretend Hacker Barbie during college, and now achieved its final form as Pathetic Pretend Hacker Barbie. Each iteration designed to be more dismissive and psychologically damaging than the last. But this time, instead of feeling ashamed or diminished, I felt something much more dangerous. Absolute clarity about what I needed to do next. "Pack your belongings and leave this house," Dad had commanded with theatrical finality. "You're not welcome here until you abandon this ridiculous fantasy and apologize for disrespecting everything your family has built." They'd given me 45 minutes to gather 22 years of possessions into garbage bags and cardboard boxes, creating a scene that had entertained half the neighborhood as I loaded my Honda Civic under the interested gazes of people who'd known me since childhood. But as I drove away from their mansion with my savings account balance of $31,000 and a client list that was growing every week, I wasn't thinking about their rejection or the neighbors' gossip. I was planning exactly how I was going to prove them catastrophically wrong about everything they thought they knew about technology, success, and their youngest daughter's potential for greatness. The private dining room at the Four Seasons Beverly Hills was exactly what I'd expected from my family's attempt to impress their most important clients: crystal chandeliers, floor-to-ceiling windows with panoramic city views, and an atmosphere of calculated elegance designed to suggest success, stability, and social significance. I'd chosen my outfit with the same strategic precision I applied to penetrating hostile networks. A black Valentino dress, expensive enough to belong in this environment, but simple enough not to upstage Victoria's moment in the spotlight. Everything about my appearance said, successful, confident, but appropriately restrained. Exactly the image my mother had tried to train me to project when I was still attempting to fit into their narrow definition of acceptable femininity. Victoria spotted me first, gliding across the room in a champagne-colored Vera Wang gown that probably cost more than most people's mortgage payments. She looked absolutely radiant in that particular way that comes from never having to question whether you deserve the good things life has given you, never having to prove your worth through accomplishment rather than compliance. Her embrace was performed with the kind of practiced warmth that photographs beautifully, but feels hollow when you're actually experiencing it. The signature move of someone who'd mastered the art of looking loving while feeling nothing at all. Everyone, this is my baby sister, Alexandra, she announced to a cluster of nearby guests, her voice carrying just the right note of affectionate condescension. She works with computers. Like I was a customer service representative at an electronics store or a freelance website designer who worked from coffee shops. The dismissive phrasing was so perfectly calibrated to minimize my significance that I almost had to admire its efficiency. She was establishing the narrative before anyone could form their own impressions, positioning me as the family's harmless technical support person rather than someone whose professional opinion might actually matter. Alexandra, come meet Blake, Victoria continued, steering me toward a tall man in an obviously expensive Tom Ford suit who was holding court with a group of middle-aged business owners who radiated the kind of confidence that comes from never having their expertise questioned. Blake Harrison looked like Central Casting's idea of a successful corporate executive: square jaw, perfect teeth, and the kind of effortless charisma that made people want to buy whatever he was selling. He turned toward us with practiced smoothness, and I watched recognition flicker across his features as he realized he was meeting the sister he'd called about regarding Sterling Defense's cybersecurity vulnerabilities. Alexandra, he said, extending his hand with just the right amount of professional warmth. It's wonderful to finally meet you in person. Victoria talks about you constantly. His handshake was firm and confident, but his eyes held a question he couldn't ask in present company: whether I was going to mention our previous conversation about the cyber attacks targeting my family's business. Congratulations on your engagement, I replied simply, matching his professional tone while enjoying the private joke that only we understood. He had no idea that the woman he was congratulating was the same person who'd been automatically neutralizing the attacks he'd tried to warn my family about. I'm definitely the lucky one here, Blake replied, pulling Victoria closer in a gesture that looked romantic but felt calculated for the benefit of their audience. Your sister has been absolutely invaluable to Sterling Defense's growth and expansion. She's really the future of the company, the next generation of security professionals. The future of the company. I wondered how secure that future would be once the federal investigation into Victoria's side business became public knowledge. Special Agent Rodriguez had briefed me 3 days ago about my sister's arrest for corporate espionage, selling client information to Sterling Defense's competitors for additional income that supplemented her official salary. The irony was so perfect it almost hurt. She'd been monetizing the very client data I'd been protecting through my classified federal contracts. Alexandra, come say hello to Mom and Dad, Victoria commanded, steering me toward the center of the room where our parents were holding court with what were obviously their most important clients and business partners. Dad looked distinguished in his custom tuxedo, every inch the successful entrepreneur who'd built a thriving security company through decades of hard work and strategic networking. Mom was luminous in navy blue Oscar de la Renta, playing the perfect hostess role she'd rehearsed at countless charity galas and business functions. They were absolutely in their element, surrounded by people who respected their achievements and wanted to maintain profitable relationships with Sterling Defense Solutions. For just a moment. Watching them bask in the admiration of their professional community, I felt a familiar flicker of that old childhood longing. The desire to belong to this world, to be included in their pride and satisfaction, to have them look at me with the same approval they showered on Victoria. Then I remembered the garbage bags on the curb, the cruel nicknames, the systematic destruction of my confidence and dreams, and that sentimental weakness evaporated like steam. This wasn't about joining their world anymore. It was about showing them exactly what they'd thrown away when they decided I wasn't worth keeping. "There's our Alexandra," Dad said as we approached, his voice carrying exactly the right note of paternal affection for the benefit of his audience. "Everyone, this is our youngest daughter. She's into computers and technology." Into computers, like it was a hobby I'd eventually outgrow, like stamp collecting or amateur photography. The casual dismissal was so automatic that I doubted. He even realized he was doing it, but every person in that circle had just been told that I was essentially irrelevant to any serious business conversation they might have. "Alexandra, I'd like you to meet some very important people," Mom said, launching into introductions that positioned me as the family's well-educated but ultimately harmless eccentric. There was Robert Kim, CEO of Peninsula Manufacturing, whose company produced specialized security equipment for government contracts. Sandra Williams, president of Bay Area Logistics, who managed supply chains for half the major corporations on the West Coast. Michael Rodriguez, who ran the largest commercial real estate empire in Southern California. All of them Sterling Defense. Clients, all of them potential targets for the state-sponsored cyber attacks that Blake had mentioned, and all of them completely unaware that the woman they were politely dismissing had been protecting their digital infrastructure for the past 3 years. "And this is Diana Chen," Dad continued with obvious pride, gesturing toward a sharp-looking woman in her 50s who radiated the kind of quiet authority that comes from building something significant from nothing. She founded and runs Nextech Solutions, the largest digital transformation consulting firm on the West Coast. I knew Nextech Solutions by reputation, and Diana Chen was legendary in the cybersecurity world. She'd built her company from a one-person startup to a Fortune 500 powerhouse, survived multiple recessions, and was widely regarded as one of the most brilliant strategic minds in the technology industry. She was also, according to my intelligence sources, about to become very interested in our family drama. "Miss Chen," I said, extending my hand with genuine respect. "It's an honor to meet you. I've followed Nextech's work for years." There was something in her expression that suggested she knew more about this conversation than she was letting on, a kind of amused anticipation that made me wonder what exactly she'd heard about Sterling Defense's youngest daughter. "Please, call me Diana," she replied with a smile that seemed far too knowing for a casual introduction. "And you work in computers, I understand. What kind of computer work do you do?" The moment I'd been planning for 8 years had finally arrived. The question that would detonate everything they thought they knew about their family's dynamics and their youngest daughter's place in the world. I looked around the circle of successful business owners, all of them waiting for me to describe some minor technical support role that would confirm their assumptions about my irrelevance to serious professional matters. I thought about the classified contracts in my office safe, the federal agents who consulted me about national security threats, the infrastructure protection systems I'd designed that kept millions of Americans safe from digital warfare. "I run a cybersecurity consulting firm called CyberShield Dynamics," I said simply, my voice calm and confident. "We specialize in critical infrastructure protection and work primarily with federal agencies." The effect was immediate and absolutely devastating. Diana Chen's eyes widened in genuine shock. Robert Kim choked on his champagne so violently that Sandra Williams had to pound on his back. Michael Rodriguez actually dropped his appetizer, the small plate shattering on the marble floor with a sound like breaking dreams. Did you say CyberShield Dynamics? Diana asked, her voice barely above a whisper. As in the CyberShield Dynamics that prevented the West Coast power grid attack. Last year, the company that holds federal contracts for infrastructure protection across 17 states. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear conversations from other tables, the clink of silverware, the distant sound of traffic on Wilshire Boulevard 40 floors below us. That's us, I confirmed, watching my parents' faces cycle. Through confusion, disbelief, and the dawning realization that something fundamental about their worldview was about to be shattered. "Wait," said Robert Kim, finding his voice after several attempts. "You're Alexandra Sterling? The Alexandra Sterling?" I wasn't sure about the emphasis, but I nodded anyway. "Holy shit," Sandra Williams whispered, apparently forgetting where she was. "Your company saved our entire logistics network last year. The ransomware attack that never happened because your systems stopped it before it could cause any damage." Now my parents were paying attention with the kind of focused intensity usually reserved for medical emergencies or financial disasters. "Alexandra," Dad said slowly, his voice carrying a tremor I'd never heard before. "What exactly do you do for a living?" Before I could answer, Diana Chen stepped forward like a star witness taking the stand. "Mr. Sterling, your daughter runs one of the most successful cybersecurity firms in America. CyberShield Dynamics generated $58.5 million in revenue last year. Alexandra personally earned approximately $8.45 million. The silence was deafening. Mom's champagne flute slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor in a crystalline explosion that seemed to echo through the entire dining room. Dad. S face went through several color changes before settling on an alarming shade of purple that made me briefly concerned about his blood pressure. Victoria looked like someone had just informed her that gravity was optional and physics was more of a suggestion than a law. "But that's impossible," Mom whispered, her voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the party. "She just plays with computers. She doesn't have a real job." The denial was so complete, so fundamental to their worldview, that they literally couldn't process information that contradicted their assumptions about my capabilities and worth. "She doesn't play with computers, Mrs. Sterling," said Michael Rodriguez, his voice carrying the weight of someone delivering devastating testimony. "She protects them. Her systems have been safeguarding my company's data for the past 4 years. I pay CyberShield Dynamics more annually than I spend on physical security, building maintenance, and insurance combined." The revelation was hitting them in waves, each new piece of information more devastating than the last. "How much more?" Dad asked weakly, like a man watching his house burn down while discovering he'd forgotten to pay the insurance premiums. "About 15 times more than my total physical security budget," Michael replied matter-of-factly. "Last year alone, Alexandra's systems prevented 3 major cyber attacks that would have cost my company approximately $47 million in damages, legal fees, and recovery costs." $47 million. Dad was doing the math in his head, realizing that one of his clients was paying me more money than Sterling Defense Solutions made in total annual revenue. The mathematical reality was sinking in like cold water. Their worthless daughter was not only successful, she was more successful than they could ever dream of becoming. "There's something else," Diana Chen continued, and I could hear the anticipation in her voice as she prepared to deliver the final blow. "Alexandra's company has been providing back-end infrastructure protection for Sterling Defense Solutions clients for the past 3 years. About 70% of your corporate contracts are only viable because CyberShield Dynamics has been automatically defending them against state-sponsored cyber attacks." This was news to me. Apparently, some of my federal protection protocols had been automatically securing businesses connected to infrastructure networks I monitored. The irony was so perfect it was almost surgical in its precision. "You mean," Victoria said slowly, her voice climbing toward hysteria, "Alexandra has been protecting our clients this entire time?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, like evidence of some cosmic joke that had been played on all of them. Without us knowing it? Diana nodded with the satisfaction of someone delivering a perfectly timed punchline. Your sister's systems have prevented approximately $2.6 billion in potential cyber attack damages to companies in this room alone. It's all part of classified federal infrastructure protection protocols. $2.6 billion. The number settled over the gathering like radioactive fallout, contaminating every assumption they'd made about success, value, and family dynamics. But we don't pay for any cybersecurity services, Dad said, his confusion evident in every syllable. We can't afford those kinds of consulting fees. The admission of financial vulnerability was probably more than he'd intended to reveal, but shock had apparently overridden his usual careful control over sensitive information. You don't pay because it's classified federal protection, Diana explained with the patience of someone educating children about basic concepts they should have understood years ago. Alexandra's company monitors critical infrastructure, which includes the business networks of companies like yours. It's all part of national security protocols that operate automatically and invisibly. The explanation was both true and devastating. While they'd been dismissing me as a failure, I'd been the invisible force keeping their business viable and their clients protected from digital warfare they didn't even know existed. I watched my family process this information like witnesses to a car accident, unable to look away from the wreckage of their assumptions about my worth and their own success. The daughter they'd dismissed as a pathetic pretend hacker Barbie had been protecting their livelihood without them even knowing it existed. The daughter they'd thrown out for refusing to file paperwork and answer phones was now earning more money than they would make in several lifetimes combined. The daughter they'd said would never amount to anything had been revealed as the hidden guardian angel keeping their business afloat while they slept peacefully in their Beverly Hills mansion. Alexandra, Blake said, his voice filled with something that might have been awe, terror, or professional respect. When I called you last week about the cyber attacks on Sterling Defense, you already knew about them, didn't you? The question was both an accusation and a plea for understanding. He'd been trying to warn me about threats to my family's business, not knowing that I was already aware of every digital probe, every attempted intrusion, every effort by foreign adversaries to compromise their client data. Yes, I replied simply, my voice steady and professional. And you've been protecting us this entire time, Victoria said, finally understanding the full scope of what had been revealed. Your networks are automatically included in our federal infrastructure monitoring systems. The attacks, Blake noticed, were being neutralized in real time by protocols I designed specifically to defend against state-sponsored cyber warfare. The technical explanation probably meant nothing to them, but the emotional impact was clear. I'd been saving them while they slept, protecting them while they mocked me. Why didn't you tell us? Victoria demanded, her voice carrying the kind of outrage that comes from discovering you've been wrong about something fundamental. The question was so perfectly tone-deaf that I almost had to admire its complete lack of self-awareness. When exactly should I have told you? I asked, my voice remaining calm while my words landed like precision strikes. When you called me pathetic pretend hacker Barbie? When you told me I was living in a fantasy world? When Dad threw me out of the house for refusing to answer phones at your company? Each question hit like a physical blow, and I watched their faces register the impact of their own cruelty being reflected back at them. The guests were witnessing this family drama unfold with the fascination of people watching a building demolition, unable to look away from the systematic destruction of everything they'd thought they knew about the Sterling family dynamics. We never meant, Mom started, but I cut her off before she could begin rewriting history. You meant exactly what you said, I interrupted, my voice carrying the weight of 8 years of documented emotional abuse. You thought I was a failure, so you treated me like one. You thought my work was pretend, so you dismissed it completely. You thought I'd never amount to anything worthwhile, so you cut me out of your lives without a second thought. The accusations were factual, verifiable, and devastating in their accuracy. There was no defense against the truth, no way to claim they'd been misunderstood or taken out of context. "But we're family," Dad said weakly, playing his last remaining card in a game he'd already lost completely. "Are we?" I asked, genuinely curious about his definition of family relationships. Because real families don't throw away their children for choosing unconventional career paths. Real families don't use cruel nicknames to systematically destroy their children's confidence and self-worth. Real families don't mock their children's dreams and then act surprised when those dreams become more successful than anything the family ever accomplished. I turned to Diana Chen, who had been watching this confrontation with obvious fascination and what appeared to be professional admiration for the systematic precision of my revenge. "Thank you for the kind words about my company," I said with genuine gratitude. "If you'll excuse me, I should be going. I have an early morning briefing with federal agents about protecting the power grid from foreign cyber attacks." The casual mention of my actual responsibilities was designed to emphasize the gap between their perception of my work and the reality of my professional importance. But before I left, I turned back to my family one final time, savoring this moment. I'd been planning and anticipating for 8 long years. 8 years ago, you told me to get a real job and stop embarrassing the family with my computer fantasies. Tonight, you discovered who actually had the real job and who was living in a fantasy world all along. The words were carefully chosen. For maximum impact, a perfect summary of the role reversal that had been revealed through Diana's testimony and their clients' shocked reactions. "Alexandra, wait!" Victoria called as I headed for the exit, her voice carrying a desperation I'd never heard before. I stopped but didn't turn around, giving her one last chance to surprise me with something approaching genuine humanity. "Are you going to keep protecting us?" The question everyone wanted answered. The test of whether I was as petty and vindictive as they'd always accused me of being, or as professional and ethical as I'd proven myself to be through my government work. Sterling Defense Solutions networks will continue to receive federal infrastructure protection as long as they qualify under current protocols, I said formally, using the kind of bureaucratic language that emphasized the institutional nature of my decision rather than any personal feelings. Any changes to that status will be communicated through official government channels. Translation: I would protect them because it was my professional responsibility and legal obligation, not because they were my family or because I felt any emotional connection to their welfare. I walked out of the Four Seasons into the Beverly Hills night, leaving behind the wreckage of their assumptions, their pride, and their carefully constructed narrative about family success and failure. Behind me, I could hear the murmur of voices as my parents tried to explain to their most important clients how they'd managed to disown and humiliate the woman who'd been keeping their businesses safe from digital warfare. It was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard, the symphony of their professional embarrassment playing in perfect harmony with my personal vindication. The knock on my office door came at exactly 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks later. My assistant announced that Michael Sterling was requesting 5 minutes of my time, no appointment scheduled, but he seemed desperate and had been waiting in the lobby since 7:30. I could have refused, should have refused, maintained professional boundaries and let him communicate through official channels like any other potential client. Instead, I heard myself saying, "Send him in," curious to see what desperation looked like on a man who'd once been so confident in his authority over my future. Dad looked older than I remembered from Victoria's engagement party, his hair grayer, his face more deeply lined, the confident businessman replaced by someone who looked exhausted and defeated. The transformation was startling. 2 weeks ago, he'd been holding court with important clients, radiating success and social authority. Now he stood awkwardly in my office doorway, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows, the government commendations. On my walls, the obvious symbols of achievement and recognition that had been invisible to him when they could have mattered to our relationship. "Thank you for seeing me, Alexandra," he said quietly, his voice carrying none of the commanding authority I remembered from childhood confrontations. "I know you don't owe me anything, especially not your time or attention." The acknowledgement of my autonomy was probably the first time in my life he'd recognized my right to make independent decisions about our relationship. It was simultaneously gratifying and pathetic, validation arriving decades too late to repair the damage he'd inflicted. "Sterling Defense Solutions is finished," he continued without preamble, apparently deciding that direct honesty was his only remaining strategy. "Victoria's been arrested and charged with corporate espionage, selling client information to our competitors for additional income. Blake's company is terminating all contracts and suing us for breach of trust. Our insurance won't cover the damages because corporate espionage is considered an intentional internal violation rather than an external attack." I already knew all of this information from my FBI briefings, but I let him continue his confession without interruption. "We're going to lose everything," Dad continued, his voice breaking slightly on the admission of complete failure. "The house, the business, our reputation, everything we worked our entire lives to build and maintain." The irony was exquisite. The man who'd thrown me out for refusing to accept failure was now begging for help after achieving spectacular failure himself. "The bankruptcy attorneys say we'll be lucky to avoid criminal charges as co-conspirators, even though we had no knowledge of Victoria's activities." I waited, giving him space to ask for whatever he'd come here to request, curious whether he'd finally learned enough humility to make this conversation worthwhile. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you," he said, the words seeming to cause him physical pain. "But you're the only person who might be able to help us salvage something from this disaster. Maybe you could provide character references for the bankruptcy proceedings, or help us find new employment opportunities, or..." He trailed off, finally understanding the magnitude of what he was requesting from the daughter he'd disowned. "Why should I help you?" I asked quietly, genuinely curious about his reasoning. The question wasn't rhetorical. I wanted to understand what argument he thought might be persuasive after 8 years of systematic emotional abuse and rejection. "Because we're family," he replied, falling back on the same defense he'd used at Victoria's engagement party, apparently believing that shared DNA created obligations that transcended his treatment of me throughout my childhood and adolescence. "You threw me out of the family," I reminded him, my voice remaining calm and professional. "You said I wasn't your daughter if I refused to accept your definition of success and appropriate career choices. You made it very clear that family status was conditional on compliance with your expectations and approval of your decisions." The reminder was factual and devastating, stripping away any pretense that his current desperation represented genuine concern for family relationships rather than pure self-interest. "I was wrong," he admitted, the words coming out like he was pulling glass shards from his throat. "I was wrong about everything. Your work, your potential, your value as a person and professional. I was a fool who let pride and ignorance destroy the most important relationships in my life." The apology was more comprehensive than I'd ever expected to hear, but it was also 8 years too late to change the fundamental damage he'd inflicted on our relationship and my emotional development. "I'll transfer $65,000 to an account of your choosing," I said after a long moment of consideration. "That should cover basic living expenses and moving costs for several months while you figure out your next steps. After that, you're on your own financially and professionally." Relief flooded his features like sunrise after a long night, and for a moment, I could see traces of the father who'd once read me bedtime stories before he'd decided that my interests and dreams were character defects to be corrected rather than talents to be nurtured. "Alexandra, I can't begin to express how grateful..." he started, but I cut him off before he could mistake charity for reconciliation. "I'm not doing this for you," I interrupted firmly. "I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do, because someone in this family should model decent human behavior rather than petty vindictiveness. Don't mistake financial assistance for emotional forgiveness or relationship repair." The distinction was crucial. I could choose to be generous without choosing to be naive about the likelihood of genuine change in his character or values. And Dad, I continued, using the familial term deliberately for the first time in our conversation, don't confuse charity with absolution. What you did to me, the systematic destruction of my confidence and dreams, the years of emotional abuse disguised as parental guidance, that damage doesn't disappear because you're sorry now or because you finally recognized that I was right about my potential all along. The words were harsh but necessary, establishing boundaries that would prevent him from misinterpreting my assistance as approval of his parenting or validation of his current transformation. He left my office without another word, and I watched. From my window, as he walked to his 15-year-old BMW, the Lamborghini Aventador SVJ, in my reserved parking space, providing a stark visual reminder of how dramatically our financial situations had reversed. That afternoon, I authorized the money transfer and made a note in my calendar to send holiday cards to whatever address they ended up at after losing their Beverly Hills mansion. Not because I'd forgiven them, but because I was committed to being a better person than they'd raised me to be. Someone who could choose generosity over grudges and professional success over personal vendettances. Later that evening, I opened my laptop and accessed a file I hadn't looked at in months. My motivation database, the comprehensive program I'd started at 14 to document every slight, every dismissal, every moment. They'd made me feel worthless or ashamed of my intellectual curiosity and technical abilities. 63 pages of meticulously cataloged emotional abuse, 8 years of fuel for revenge fantasies that had ultimately motivated me to achieve more than I'd ever imagined possible. I selected all the data and hit delete, watching 8 years of documented pain disappear into digital oblivion. The broken little girl who'd been called pathetic pretend hacker Barbie was gone forever, replaced by a woman who'd learned that the best revenge isn't cruelty or vindictiveness. It's building something so successful and meaningful that the people who hurt you become irrelevant to your happiness and self-worth. I'd proven them wrong about everything they'd believed about technology, success, and my potential for greatness. But more importantly, I'd proven to myself that I could choose to be generous and professional even when dealing with people who'd shown me nothing but cruelty and dismissal. What do you think about Alexandra's incredible journey from outcast to cyber warrior? If you were in her position, would you have kept building your empire in silence until it was too big to ignore? Or would you have demanded recognition from your family much earlier? Have you ever felt completely invisible to the people whose approval you desperately wanted? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one and love hearing your perspectives on these complex family dynamics. Forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss stories about resilience, revenge, and finding your true worth in a world that tries to define your limits. Like this video if Alexandra's story resonated with you, and share it with someone who needs to hear that their dreams are valid, even when nobody else believes in them.